Hi everyone, the partial prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. Okay, so today we're going to discuss out of time. Does Back to the Future tell us when Jesus will return? Okay, so Back to the Future is three movies that came out in 1985 was the first one. Um, And so, what's interesting about it is that I've already discussed a little bit about some of the 9/11 symbolism in the movie, the hidden clues. Um, and um, like, I keep um, either finding more myself or um, listening to like YouTube videos of other people that have covered it and seen what they came up with. So, very interesting. So, there's a lot of 9/11 hidden clues in the movie. So what's really interesting about the movie is, and so I came up with a new one just as I was getting ready to make this video. Um, so the first movie came out in 1985, and then 9/11 was um, 16 years later. Um, so it's kind of interesting because the first clue relates to 116 on the Twin Pines Mall sign. Um, so I think that's a clue of when we were going to see these prophecies happen, 16 years later after the movie. So it's a trilogy of movies, and um, and so these scenes are from the first movie. And so basically, there's a guy named Marty, and then um, he's connected to this professor, or I'm not quite sure what he is. They call him Doc Brown, so a scientist. Um, and um, okay, so in the first movie, Doc invents a time machine, and he ends up sending Marty back into the past. And then the whole reason why it's called Back to the Future, because it's about trying to get Marty back into his time frame, um, which would be the future of um, the time frame, that he's in. He gets sent back to 1955, and so he's trying to get back to 1985. And so what's interesting is when he leaves, so he meets Doc at the mall at 116, and then that's when Doc reveals his time machine. And so what's interesting is when he first goes to the mall, it's called the Twin Pines Mall. Okay. And so then when we take the sign, the 116, and turn it upside down, it says 9/11. Okay. So that's our first clue that we see in the movie. And then what's interesting is that when Marty does eventually come back to the future or his time frame, um, the name of the mall is changed to the Lone Pine Mall. Okay, very fascinating. And so what's interesting about that is that that connects to 9/11 because um, what we have is the Twin Towers fell on 9/11 and then they were rebuilt to be the One World Trade Center. Okay, so see that connection there where you go from two pines to one pine? Okay. Um, so very interesting. And then some of the other signs just in, this first movie, just in this picture, I was looking at this picture and like you see the reflection of the headlights off of the van there. That's a 9/11 sign, a picture of the 11 kind of lit up. Um, and then even there's reflections of lights off the truck, off of Doc Brown's truck, that has, kind of that same picture um, of, kind of a lit up 11. And then even Doc with his hands up is kind of this 9/11 picture. Um, and so, what I really think this 9/11 picture, I talked about it in some of my other videos, but what I think we have, it's kind of the same picture of like Jesus on the cross. Um, and so when Jesus was on the cross, he had a thief on his right and a thief on his left. Okay, so when Doc's like raising his hands, it's like he's Jesus and then he's got someone on his right and someone on his left. Um, um, so that sign ends up showing a lot, shows up a lot in scripture, and then it just shows up a lot in our life. And so I think God is definitely trying to send a message. Okay. And then what's interesting too is okay, so this is the end of the movie, and so this is another 9/11 picture, another sign from the movie. And this actually came out, this picture itself came out of a video that I found on YouTube that talks about the prophecies in 9/11, and I'd recommend it to you, except it's kind of weird, and I'm not even really sure who did it because I've seen two different people kind of claim it. Um, but it kind of gets off into kind of this weird 2001 Space Odyssey thing, and so it's just a little kind of on the bizarre side. Um, but it did have this picture, because I don't have a good way to kind of capture pictures from the film, and so I have to kind of get them off the internet somehow. And so it's kind of hard to see the way he cropped this picture. But what you have on the left hand side, we have, it looks like it's a big arrow that's going around the Western Auto sign, and it looks like a big lit up 9. Okay. And then what you see is the tire tracks after Marty gets sent back into the future. The burning tire tracks look like a big 11. Okay. Um, and so what's interesting, I think what's really interesting about this picture is I think this is a picture that God's using to explain um, really kind of what the 9/11 all means. Okay. And so I talked about in some of my 9/11 videos, I talked about 9 being kind of the heavenly number. And then 11 could be a picture of the two thieves, but 11 also connects to judgment. Okay. And in this picture, we see kind of a strong picture of how the 9 is like heavenly, it's kind of up in the air, whereas the burning 11 is down on the ground. And so I think this picture is a good, um, message from God showing us, really what the 9 and the 11 stand for. Okay. Um, so, um, anyways, and what's kind of interesting too is that when Marty ends up, I don't have any pictures of this, but when he ends up going, so he ends up driving toward this movie theater. Okay, and so it's still a movie theater in 1955, but when he ends up in 1955, he crashes into it, and it's an Assemblies of Christ. Okay, so I think that's very prophetical. Okay, um, that the movie theater turns into the Assemblies of Christ. Okay, so very interesting. Um, and then we see kind of that same 9/11 picture. Um, this is at the beginning of the movie. Doc is testing out um, his time machine, and so he sends um, his dog like a minute into the future or a minute into the past or something like that, and then he compares the two clocks, and so I think that I haven't had a chance to check that, but I think the two clocks are also 9/11 pictures because I think they might say 116. I'm not really sure. Um, but that's what they said in that other video, so I'll have to check on that. But then what's interesting is this picture is, after his dog gets sent into the past or the future. I don't know where he gets sent. Um, the two tire tracks get left behind. So whenever the car gets sent into the future or the past or wherever it's time traveling, it leaves behind burning tire tracks. Okay. And so what's interesting is that the license plate fell off the car and the license plate says OutATime. Okay. And so I thought this picture is very prophetical because one, it could be, if you see a burning tower on the right and a burning tower on the left, then you are out of time. But also, Jesus the Messiah, which could connect to the number 9, he is kind of an out of time type figure. Um, like he's not like as connected to the earthly time thing, if that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. Um, so definitely very interesting. And then one of the other things about this movie is that one of the jokes in the movie is when he goes back to 1955, they ask him, well, I think Doc asks him, so who's the president in 1985? And he says Reagan, and Doc says Reagan, the actor, and it's a big joke. Well, so I thought that was very interesting because I have taken Daniel's statue um, from Daniel 2 in the Bible and plotted out because plotted it out with the last, 7 presidents, starting with Reagan. And so the reason why I thought Reagan was very significant is that Reagan was like 40 years ago. Okay. And so that's why I think that's another clue from Back to the Future where, it's like, okay, you want to start counting your 7 or 8 kings with Reagan. Okay. Um, and, so I really think that Reagan is like the 40-year warning. Okay. So he was president in 1981, and then here we are 40 years later in 2021. Okay. Um, so, um, so this is how I kind of laid out, what I thought. I have a little bit of confusion with how the feet and the toes um, kind of match up because um, in Daniel 2 it talks about the feet and toes being part iron and part clay, and it's a divided kingdom. So it could be a continuation of Trump and his followers maybe are 1 feet, and Joe Biden and his followers are 2nd foot. Um, or maybe it's like 2 feet would be a picture of God's people, and the 10 toes would be, because that would match, the 10 toes would match the 10 in the wilderness that don't have faith, whereas there's 2, when they sent the 12 spies, 10 of them don't have faith, and then 2 of them do. So the feet would like match to the 2 that have um, faith, and the 10 toes match to the ones that don't have faith. Um, but we also kind of read in scripture too about like the the um the bottom of the foot. Okay, because like the dove that Noah sends out can't find any rest for the sole of her foot. Okay. Um, so I think there's a whole foot thing that God's kind of doing that I don't totally get. But one thought I had too when I was like kind of writing Divided Kingdom was one of the things that I'm seeing now is um, that we're seeing kind of the Democrats are really starting to kind of get divided and not being able to accomplish much. And so I thought, so maybe that's connected to the feet and the toes. Um, and um, so Ronald Reagan, um, his inauguration was January 20th, 1981, and then um, October 21st, which is going to be the big focus of this video, um, is 40 years, 9 months, and 2 days after his inauguration. Okay, so I definitely think that's very interesting. Um, and so this is the verse that we find in Revelation where it says, here's the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. The beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. So the 5 that have fallen could be Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama. Or you could also maybe have that say the 5th has fallen, which would be Obama. And then it says 1 is. Well, the context of these verses are Babylon, okay? So the 1 is connects to Trump, which would be the 6th king, Okay, and then the seventh king, um, the other one has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. So I'm wondering if we're going to see Biden's just for a little while. Okay, and then it talks about an eighth beast or an eighth king, who is of the seven. So kind of like we're gonna see someone come back. And I always thought for the longest time, I always thought it was Obama was gonna come back, and he did kind of come back through Biden. Okay, but now I'm realizing that I think the eighth um, beast that's gonna come back is Trump. Okay, and what's very interesting about it, what Revelation says about this beast is that he goes to destruction. Okay, and it's very interesting that that's verse 11. Okay, Revelation 17:11. Okay, because that connects to the 9/11. Okay, um, or at least the 11 part of the 9/11. Okay, so that's another clue that I think we get from this movie, the Reagan clue. Okay, Um, and then I have found this and talked about it in one of my videos. There's a 1335 clue, okay, in the movie. And so that comes from Daniel 12, and it says, "How blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to the 1335 days. But as for you, go your way to the end, Daniel, then you will enter into rest and rise again for your allotted portion at the end of the age." Okay. So um so Marty comes back to the mall at 1:33, and what's interesting is that Marty like makes up this final five for the 1335. Okay, so it's 133, and there's Marty walking on that side of the sign. Okay, um, so there's five letters in Marty, there's five letters in McFly. Um, what was interesting is that, okay, so I'm wondering if what was interesting is that Marty wanted more time so he could save Doc. Okay. Um, and it kind of connects to this Daniel 12:13. It says, "But as for you, Daniel, go your way to the end, then you will enter into rest and rise again for your allotted portion at the end of the age." And so I'm wondering if that's a prophetic, like, um, sometimes it's hard because I think with prophecy, sometimes I think the messianic shadows also work for what I think is that Trump is like a false messianic figure. Okay, and so I think this verse could relate to both him, because for a time while Biden was president, Trump was kind of resting. Okay, but then he's going to rise again for his allotted portion. Okay, at the very end. um um And what's interesting about the 1335 days is that, so last year, Trump made all those quote unquote peace deals. Okay. And what was interesting was that on um, September 15th of last year, 2020, Trump had this big like signing ceremony. Um, I think that was in Washington, D.C. And, um, Netanyahu even came out for it. And and so they had people from the United Arab Emirates country, and then people from Bahrain come, and they had this big signing ceremony on September 15th. Okay, so what was really interesting about that is that that was the 1335th day of Trump's presidency. Um, and um, it actually might be the 1335th day, like from when he was picked as the candidate. So it might not have come from, his inauguration, but it might have gone back to when he became a candidate. Okay, but somewhere in there, I did calculations and came up with 1335. Okay. Well, so what's interesting is when I read these verses in Daniel is that like it kind of says, how blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to 1335 days. So what I kind of think is that there's like a bunch of people that when Trump made all these quote unquote peace deals, they kind of turned him into a messianic figure in their eyes. Okay. And so they're feeling blessed because they feel like they have found their Messiah. Okay. Um, in kind of a weird whatever. However, however that deluding influence works that I believe God put on them, they're happy because, they're looking at Trump and they think Trump's going to come back and, just accomplish everything that they're wanting him to accomplish. And so that's what I think, is that there's a bunch of people that are feeling blessed, because of these peace deals that Trump signed. Okay. I mean, it could very well be that 9/15/2020 was when God actually um, put the deluding influence on these people. Okay. It was interesting because it was 15 months after Trump Heights. Trump Heights was the city that Netanyahu gave Trump in Israel. Okay. It was also 33 days after 8/13, which was the first peace deal, the United Arab Emirates deal. Okay. So definitely interesting. So we see kind of a clue with 1335. Okay. But what I'm wondering is, okay, so Marty returns to the mall at 1:33 a.m. The mall is now called the Lone Pie Mall because Marty ends up actually knocking down one of the trees in 1955. Okay. And then so Marty ends up returning to the mall right when Doc is being shot by Libyans. Okay. So what I'm wondering about Marty is that if Marty is kind of this wannabe messianic figure, so he wants to come back and help Doc with the terrorists, and so he tries to give himself more time, but he only gives himself like 10 minutes, and really his car breaks down, and so he doesn't get to the mall until Doc is being shot. Okay, so he really ends up not saving Doc. Um, well, indirectly he does because he writes a letter that Doc reads, and so then Doc puts on um, um, a a bulletproof vest. Okay, um, but it's kind of interesting because I kind of think that Marty's kind of this good picture of a wannabe messianic figure. Okay, what's interesting is that so Marty is a wannabe messianic figure who returns when there is trouble with terrorists killing Americans. So it's kind of interesting because we've had Biden has kind of caused all the trouble in Afghanistan and gotten Americans killed because of allowing the Taliban to return to power in Afghanistan. Okay. And so, what I think is that, that's going to be one of the things that prompts um, Trump returning. Okay. Um, or, it's one of those things that causes his followers to say, we want Trump back. Okay. Because look at all this mess that Biden is doing. Okay. Um, and so what I think this picture, which is very interesting, where Marty ends up knocking down one of the pines, is so if Marty is a picture of Trump, that's what I believe happens, is that Trump's going to return and he's going to knock down one of the pines. Like what I believe is that the pines represent um, Trump and his followers on the right and Biden and his followers on the left. Um, Pun intended, or however you want to say that. Um, and then, so I think Trump returns and he ends up, um, him and his followers end up bringing down Biden. Okay. Because I think Biden is actually like, um, um, there's a figure in the scripture called Gedaliah who ends up getting killed by Ishmael. Okay, Trump is definitely an Ishmael picture. Okay, Sarah and Abraham have two sons. The first one is Ishmael, and he's a wild donkey of a man. Okay, definitely read about Ishmael. It sounds like Trump. Okay, And Abraham wants, kind of like God to fulfill his purposes through Ishmael, and God says, no, it's going to be through Isaac who comes from your flesh. Okay. And so the true Messiah is going to be, uh, a true son of Abraham. I mean, I believe he's going to be Jewish. Okay. And Trump is not Jewish. Okay. Um, and anyway, so it's interesting because I think Ishmael is a picture of Trump, and then there's another Ishmael that ends up killing Gedalia, who's in charge of, who's head of the people. Okay, so I think that could be a picture of Trump, Trump um, killing Biden. Okay, or his followers, or however you want to say that. Um, so I talked about 1335 connecting to when the two peace deals were being signed. The only thing about that is in this movie, then it doesn't kind of make sense that, I don't know how that would connect to this picture of, Doc being shot by the Libyans, um, right at 1335. Um, but I'm wondering too if 1335 is also kind of a, like, I think sometimes numbers are symbolic in scripture. So I'm wondering if it connects to 1335, sometimes reminds me of times, and half a time. Okay. Um, and so, so what I think it is that we have Marty, who's a picture of Trump, returns during the half a time. Okay. Because one would be the time, the 3 connects to the 2 times, and then the 5 connects to the half a time. Okay, so that's what I'm kind of wondering about that. And so the half a time, I think kind of what it is I think God gives Trump um just like a half a week to do his destruction, is what I think. And that comes from Daniel 9. He makes a covenant with the many for 1 week, and in the middle of the week he puts a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. So then I wanted to put in this picture just because you could see how this connects to, the two fiery tire tracks. Okay, so this is Trump Tower. He had a fire in one of his towers in New York. Okay, what was very interesting is that the blaze broke out on the 50th floor of the tower. Okay, um, so that's kind of interesting because it connects back to this number 5. Okay, but also we see with 50, that shows up later. So hang on there and we'll talk about the number 50 too. Okay. Um, so I just put this in here to remind you. Do you see kind of a similar picture? Um, okay, and I threw in the story of Samson because I thought we'd talk a little bit about the Bible. And because Samson is, this story in Samson is definitely a 9/11 picture. Okay. So it says, now the lords of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god and to rejoice, for they said, our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hands. Okay, I didn't change that, but I should have changed that to say Biden and his followers. Okay. Um, so this would be a picture of kind of Biden and his followers, like, celebrating because Trump lost the election and Biden won. Okay. And then they said, when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God has given our enemy into our hands, even the destroyer of our country, who has slain many of us. It so happened when they were in high spirits that they said, call for Samson that he may amuse us. Okay, so what you had is that Samson was thrown into prison. Okay. Okay, this comes out of Judges. Okay, so Samson is one of the judges. Okay, Samson gets thrown into prison, but then it's like he gets an opportunity to get out of prison for a short little amount of time. Okay. And so what you could say is that's a picture of Trump right now, is kind of in a type of prison. Um, kind of like he was thrown into the pit, that he lost his power. Okay. Um, but then what what happens is when everybody's in high spirits, I don't know what that means. I mean, some of that relates to, you have the Belshazzar story, who Belshazzar is the picture of Biden, where they're drinking the wine from the vessels from the temple. And so basically, what we have is Biden right now and all his followers are kind of getting drunk off of the riches of America. Okay. Um, and so, I mean, they're wanting to pass these huge bills that are trillions of dollars, spending trillions of our money. Um, and so when everybody's in high spirits getting drunk off of the riches of America, there's going to be a group of people say, call for Samson that he may amuse us. So we're going to have a group of people calling for Trump to come back. So they called for Samson from the prison and he entertained them. And they made him stand between the pillars. Okay, so normally that's where Jesus would be, in between the pillars. Okay, but Samson is standing between the pillars. Then Samson said to the boy who was holding his hand, "Let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them." Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there, and about 3,000 men and women were on the roof looking on while Samson was amusing them. Then Samson, okay, so these 3,000 people that are like on the roof looking on, okay, so that would be a picture of like the people in power. Okay, so Biden and his followers that are in power. Okay, Jesus in Matthew 24, he talks about when you see the abomination of desolation, those that are on the rooftop don't go down to get your coats. The ones that are in the field shouldn't go back into the city. So I think the ones on the roof that shouldn't go back to get their coat would be a picture of leadership. Okay, kind of when they crucified Jesus, they took his coat, okay, and divided his clothes. And so it's kind of like for Biden's people, you don't want to, don't go into the house to try to reclaim the leadership for Biden. The people that are in the field, let me think. They should not go into the city because that's where all the fighting is happening. Okay, and then um, really we're supposed to run to the mountains where Jesus is. Okay. Um, okay, so then what we have is, then Samson called to the Lord and said, "O Lord God, please remember me and please strengthen me just this time, O God, that I may at once be avenged of the Philistine for my two eyes." Okay, so the two eyes connects to the two witnesses. I believe Trump and Netanyahu were the two witnesses. And then it says Samson grasped the two middle pillars on which the house rested and braced himself against them, the one with his right hand and the other with his left. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he bent with all his might, so that the house fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than whom he killed in his life. Um, so what I'm thinking is this 9/11 picture, and it's interesting that this kind of starts in verse 29, because 9 plus 2 adds up to 11. Okay, um, is that really what we saw in 9/11 is that both towers eventually end up falling. Okay, although the South Tower ends up falling first. I think that's how it works. And then his brothers and all his father's household came down, took him, brought him up, and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. Thus he had judged Israel 20 years. Okay, very important. 20 years. Okay, we are now. Okay, so at 9/11 this year, it was the 20th anniversary. Okay, so I think that's really highly significant. Okay. Um, and so back to the movie. This is in the second movie where, okay, so these pictures actually, so in the second movie, they go into the future and then they come back to this alternate time reality. Okay. So what's kind of interesting about this alternate time reality is that um, the the bad guy Biff ends up like um, well, he ends up taking Marty's idea um, with, okay, so what's really interesting is that Marty in the future was going to buy this sport almanac, which covered 50 years. Okay, so I thought that was significant because that goes back to the 50th floor of the Trump Tower. Okay, remember I said we'll talk about where the 50 comes from? Okay, but the sports almanac was 50 years of sports trivia. So Biff ends up stealing that idea and he gets rich by betting on all these sports, events. Okay. So then when they come back, when Doc and Marty come to this alternate reality, um, there's this huge Biff tower. Okay. And what's very interesting, in front of the tower, it says "Welcome back, welcome bikers." Okay. Um, and then like the city is a wreck. Like people are shooting at each other. It's a very apocalyptic kind of look. Okay. There's like police cars all kind of burnt up and bent over and whatever. I mean, it looks kind of like things looked after the Black Lives Matter rioting. Okay. Um, so very interesting. Okay. So what I wrote is that the alternate reality is the third time frame in the second movie. Okay, the second movie was released on 11/22/1989. So I thought that was really interesting because you have 11 in there and then you have 22, which is 11 times 2. Okay, so maybe God's given us a clue that this is maybe giving us pictures of the second 9/11. Okay. Um, but yeah. So, anyways, but what's interesting too is that um, the alternate reality. Okay, so like I said, this alternate reality ends up being the third time frame. So you had first Doc and Marty were in the present day, and then they go into the future, and then they end up in this alternate reality. Okay, so it connects to the third time frame, which is, I'm wondering is connects to the time of Biden. Okay. Um, what's interesting too is that with the trilogy, the third movie was the like the setting is the Wild Wild West. Okay. Um, and so I'm wondering if that all connects to Biden's time frame. And then what we saw, okay, so what we see in the scriptures is that in the Bible, we have Daniel's three friends end up in the fiery furnace. Okay, so his three friends could also represent this third time frame, which I'm really wondering if the third time frame is the time of Biden. Um, and so, like when you start counting with Obama, so what you had was Obama, and then you had Trump. Now we're at Biden. Okay, I mean, really, when I think things started really becoming very significant. I mean, we had those other presidents, but I think really, since Reagan, but things really became significant during the time of Obama. The division really became more pronounced during the time of Obama, and Christians really got persecuted and all that kind of stuff. So so I kind of think that there's a big focus on the last three um, time frames before Messiah comes. Um, you know, is what I'm wondering. What's interesting too is that in the alternate reality, so we have Doc, Marty, and Jennifer. So three people. And it's funny because the guys that made the movie, they kind of wish they didn't have Jennifer there. Okay. Um, um, but lo and behold, um, she's there, and so that also could connect to the third time frame. Okay, so I'm wondering if this kind of crazy post apocalyptic kind of look kind of connects to Biden. Okay, what's interesting is in the third time frame, in front of Biff's tower, he welcomes the bikers. Okay, um, what I thought was interesting is that so Biff, besides him being the bad guy, his last name is Tannen, and So this part's kind of hard because unless you really actually have a script of the movie, it's hard to know how things are spelled in the movie. But if it's his name is spelled this way, then there's 6 letters in his last name. Okay. And so, what I believe is that Trump is the 6th president. Okay. So that could connect Biff to Trump. Okay. So what's interesting is Biff was welcoming the bikers. We saw Trump when he was president, he was saying, he said QAnon are good people. And then recently during Biden's presidency, Trump said the January 6th people are good people. Okay. So kind of gives you a picture of what Trump is kind of like. Um, and I mean, even, remember when he was president, he wouldn't like directly say that the white nationalists, were bad people or whatever. No one could get him to say that really clearly. So, I definitely think he's an interesting character. Um, so that's a prophetic picture. Okay. So, um, so what we have, so this is the would be the time machine, and so they ended up, you know, trying to go back to October 26, 1985. That was their alternate reality. Just where everything was kind of a mess, and Biff was in charge. So I wrote down that it was apocalyptic looking on October 26, 1985. But let's focus on, okay, the future time frame in the second time. Okay, the future time frame, which was October 21st, 2015, ended up being the second time frame in the movie. And so I'm wondering if that is showing us the second time frame of Trump. Okay. Um, you know, is kind of what I'm thinking. Um, and so what's interesting is, so they go back, they go back, they go into the future. They go, so Doc and Marty and Jennifer go to October 21st, 2015. Okay, so what's interesting is in this time frame, it's like you have two Martys. Okay, one is his dad and one is his son, but his son looks almost exactly like him. Okay, um, and then um, um, and so they kind of encounter each other in this time frame. He runs into his kid. Okay, and he tells Doc later, it's like, oh yeah, my kid showed up, and when he showed up, it's like all hell broke loose. Okay. um so I think that could be a prophetical picture of, all hell is going to break loose in the second time frame of Trump. And then we see the same thing with young Jennifer ends up meeting old Jennifer, and Doc says that if that happens, it could end up being a time paradox. Okay, so kind of the same thing. Okay, um, so that's what I'm wondering about that. Um, and then what's interesting is, so they actually go. So it's really interesting because there was a bunch of us that were really okay. So remember, there was Back to the Future Day on October 21st, 2015. So we all like pulled out the movie and watched him, and I was wondering if Jesus was going to come back, or there's going to be some connection to Jesus. Okay, well, it didn't happen in 2015. Okay, and so then we just kind of shelved it. Okay, well, it wasn't until I started doing my calculation and stuff, and all of a sudden, October 21st for this year, all of a sudden just started like standing out. Okay. Um, and so I was wondering, like, well, so, why, if God was going to send a message, why didn't he just have him go to October 21st, 2021? Um, um, you know, but I was looking at this 2015, and so if you add those up together, 2015 adds up to 8. Okay, so that would connect to the eighth king. Okay, and then Doc Brown too. When you add that all up, that adds up to 8 too. Okay, Um, so that connects to, we already read these verses in Revelation 17, the 8th. Okay. Also, they went to the future, at like around 4:30 in the afternoon. Um, so that could connect to the fourth time frame. Okay. Um, and then, so we talked about time, times, and half a time. So I think that could connect to, you have the time of Trump would be a time, you have the two times of Obama would be the times, which Obama, when I say two times of Obama, I mean Obama and then this short little time that we've had Biden. And then we have a half a time, which is, when I'm wondering if that connects to the half a week when Trump's returning. Okay. Um, what's interesting with Back to the Future is that BTTF is 4 letters there. Biff is 4 letters. Um, so I think that's all kind of interesting. Um, what's interesting when they're actually in the future, there's Griff, um, is really the bad guy. Um, and then, so that's 5 letters, so there's that number 5 showing up again. Um, and I already talked about Tannen having 6 letters. Um, so, um, I haven't had a chance to check this, but the one movie that I saw on YouTube where they were talking about the 9/11 connections in this movie is, so in the second movie in the future, so October 21st is when they're in the future. Okay, there's the scene, and it's very hard to tell in this picture. Um, oh, I guess the guy was trying to emphasize the Twin Towers, and so then he kind of made everything else black and white. I can't do fancy stuff like that. All I do is cut and paste. Um, but so it's kind of hard to tell in here. But okay, so um, so we have this scene in the future house of Marty's future house. Okay, and so his parents are there, and his dad had hurt his back, and so he was kind of floating upside down. Okay, so he's kind of this dark figure on the left that you can't really see. Um, he's floating upside down. So they're kind of showing, like, in the future how, I mean, there was a lot of things in this future picture that ended up not becoming true. Um, you know, um, so this idea of someone with back problems being upside down, floating in the air, well, we can't do that, but it's a good idea. And anyway, so then it's the grandmother's in the middle, and then Marty's daughter, future daughter, is on the right. Okay, and so they're actually looking at his TV screen, and it's broken. Okay, and so first, when they first go and look at it, it has kind of these scenery pictures, and the first scenery picture is, I mean, I haven't checked this out, but according to this movie, the first scenery picture is, it shows like kind of these 2 pine trees, and then it turns into kind of this New York skyline where you could see the Twin Towers. Okay, and so the guy in this YouTube video made the comment that if you want the best view, you need to be like George McFly floating upside down, because when you're looking at it, it looks like, if you're looking at it upside down, it looks like the towers are falling. I don't totally know kind of where he gets that um, picture and how accurate that is. But it is kind of interesting to think about that there is this guy kind of looking upside down, and so it could definitely be a picture for God saying, okay, don't forget to look at things upside down. Some of the things in this movie. Um, so it was interesting because there's 3 people watching these twin towers on the TV screen. Um, so that's that picture. Um, okay, and so what I believe is that, okay, so this is what I believe is that the 7th time frame, or the 7th king, the time frame of Biden, I think we're already at the end of that. Okay, because what happened was September 28th, 2021 was when Obama broke ground, okay, on his um like his big tower that he's planning to build in Chicago, and with school and all that kind of stuff. And so I kind of think that, and that happened on the 8th day of Sukkot. Okay. And so what I believe is, the Jewish people believe that the 7th day of Sukkot is kind of like the final day of God's judgment. And so I kind of think that, um, we read about in Genesis 11 where God, you know, comes down to see the tower and the city that people have built, and then he says, okay, I'm going to, let us go down and cause confusion. So what's been kind of interesting is that ever since September 28th, I've been noticing kind of the confusion in the Democratic Party. And so I'm thinking that God already is bringing judgment onto them and has brought confusion into the Democratic Party. But I also think that part of their judgment is going to be that Trump's going to return and, um, pull down, Biden's people, is what I believe is prophesied. Okay, so I think we're going to be moving into the 8th time frame. Um, so what's interesting about, so the reason why October 21st kind of stands out in my mind, is, well, first it started with, originally I was looking at October 10th, okay, because we read a lot about Nebuchadnezzar kind of returning to the city. Nebuchadnezzar was one of the ones who destroyed the temple, the Jewish temple, okay, and he goes into the city the 10th day of the 10th month, okay. So I actually was doing calculations from Hanukkah, and I ended up with October 20th is 10 months, 10 days from Hanukkah. And I was like, oh, well, that's really interesting. And, and then I pulled out my calendar, and, that's when I started looking at October 21st because, um, anyway, somehow it led me to October 21st. And it's like, wait a minute. October 21st. What's that from? What's that from? And then I'm like, oh, yeah, back to the future day. Okay. So, what's significant about October 21st is, um, well, first, it's Netanyahu's 72nd birthday. Okay. What we read about in Genesis, when we read about Joseph, okay, remember the cupbearer and the baker get thrown into jail with Joseph, okay, and then it says on the, he interprets their dreams, and he says, on the 3rd day, one of you are going to get restored, the other one's going to lose their power, okay. um and so what I think is the 3rd day, so they said the 3rd day is Pharaoh's birthday, okay. And so I thought that was very significant that October 21st was Netanyahu's birthday. Okay, so I think that could connect to Pharaoh's birthday. Because there's a whole thing too with Herod's birthday, a connection where, they want the head of John the Baptist, which most of the time I think John the Baptist is a picture of Trump. But then I got to thinking, no, here he could be a picture of Biden, where they want the head of Biden. Okay. Um, so that connects to birthdays. Okay. What's very interesting is that October 21st on the Hebrew calendar is the 83rd anniversary of Kristallnacht. Okay, so that is the night of broken windows. That's when the Jewish people, started getting persecuted and sent to, um, sent to the, um, oh, I can't think of it now. It's basically when the Holocaust, it was kind of really the start of the Holocaust. Okay. So what's very interesting is Kristallnacht happened in 1938. So look at this, like you got 1938. And so it connects to, when you add 83 years, it takes you to 2021. Okay. So I think that's really significant, especially because there's a connection to Psalm 83. Okay. Where God's enemies want to, take over the land. Okay. Um, And I mean, we've always kind of read that, thinking that it was like talking about Israel's enemies, but it could also be the people in America wanting to, kind of like um, take over America for their own purposes. Like Trump's people wanting to, establish their messianic kingdom with their Messiah Trump, So definitely very interesting. Very, very interesting. Um, um, and then I put in the corner here too, because remember how in the movie in Back to the Future that it's 1.21 gigawatts to get this time machine, to power the time machine. And so I highlighted, so we see that 21 number repeated in the 1.21 gigawatts, you know. And I'm also kind of wondering, because in scripture, I'm thinking like the 12th month for the world is like the first month for Jesus and his followers, So, even though it's like the 10th month, it could be the first month. Okay, so 1.21. Um, and then, um, let's see. I think I must. I think I messed up. I put this in here twice. Um, so I don't think there's anything new on this screen. Yeah, we already talked about that. Oh, although I did throw in on this screen that wasn't on the other one at the very bottom. In the third movie, the bad guy that they have to deal with is Buford Tannen, which I thought that was very interesting because then if it's spelled like I have it written here, then it's like you see 6 6 in his name. Okay. So that could connect to Trump. So very interesting. Um, okay, so then um okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't delete some things that I should have deleted. Okay. So October 21st, so I made this little chart because I thought this was very significant. Is what we have is from 9/11 to October 21st is there's a 40-day time frame in between, and then from October 21st to 11/29, which is Hanukkah day 1, there's 40 days. Okay, so we see kind of this little chiastic structure in the dates. Okay. And so what I believe is that 9/11 this year could have been the 40-day warning. Okay. Um, because it was very interesting because it was the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And so, um, we were remembering there was a lot of things on TV to, kind of refresh our memory of what happened on the original 9/11 day. Okay. So I thought that was very interesting. Um, and then you could actually take those 40 days and divide it up into two 20 days. Okay. And so 9/11, if you add 20 days, it gets you to October 1st. Okay. What's interesting, we read in scripture about the 10th month, the first day being the top of the mountains. You could see the top of the mountains. Okay. So what was interesting on October 1st is that was when they said we had reached 700,000 COVID deaths in the United States. Okay. So what I believe about um, when God was having them establish the temple, um, he had them do morning sacrifices and then he had them do evening sacrifices. Okay. So what I believe is that the Holocaust was the morning sacrifice. Okay. Um, you know, where God was getting, he's getting ready to establish his messianic kingdom. Okay, and so I believe it started with um, the Holocaust was kind of the start of it. Okay, so that was the morning sacrifice, and then what we've had now is, for the last 2 years we've had these COVID deaths. And so instead of the Nazis being the big um, you know, murderers of the day. Now we have the Chinese who I, believe um, released this disease into the world. Um, and so, I don't know the numbers worldwide, but, it's, you know, I mean, maybe it's up to 2 billion. I'm not sure. But I do know in America, we're up to 700,000. So what's interesting is when you talk about the mountains, um, I think the mountains connect to the seven churches. Okay. Um, because we read in Revelation where it talks about the woman, um, the seven heads connect to the seven mountains. Um, I mean, I think there's two different things because one, I think the seven mountains connect to the seven churches, but also the seven mountains also connect to um, the um, the seven nations in G7 also. Um, but anyways, so that's October 1st, okay, and then 20 days later would be October 21st, which is Kristallnacht anniversary. Well, actually, 20 days after 10/21 leads us to 11/9, which is the original date on the Gregorian calendar of Kristallnacht. Okay, because see that 9/11 there? Very interesting. And then if you add 20 days to the 11/9, November 9th, it takes you to November 29th, which is Hanukkah day one. Okay. So very interesting to me. Um, and then what was interesting too is that 80 days before 9/11 was when we had that Surfside condo collapse, which was another huge 9/11 picture. Okay, if you watch the video of that condo collapsing, it matches it's very eerily similar to the 9/11 videos. Okay, with the towers falling. Okay, what was interesting on that when the Surfside condo was falling was when Biden um, was, I think he signed an infrastructure bill on that day. So kind of interesting that we see kind of this. And what's very interesting is that it's the South Tower. It's, the Surfside condo. It was considered the South building, which I think the South um, connects to Biden and the North connects to Trump in kind of like the Civil War. Um, um, so that's very interesting. So that was 80 days before 9/11. 8 weeks before 9/11 was the 9th of Av, which is, the Jewish um, date where they, I mean, it's a big day of mourning because that was the date that many bad things happened to the Jewish people. Two temples were destroyed on that day, and then other various things. So that's very interesting. And then what's interesting about 10/21/21 is that it's 6 years after Back to the Future Day. Um, so definitely interesting. Okay, 10/21/21 is 24 days after Obama broke ground on his tower. Museum, etc. It's 66 days after the Taliban leader returned to Afghanistan on 8/17/2021. Okay. Um, what's interesting about 10/21/21, it's also the Hebrew date is Chesvan 15. That connects to the story. That connects to the civil war in Israel in the scripture. Okay, we have the nations. The nation of Israel gets divided, and there's Jeroboam is one of the leaders, and Rehoboam is the other leader. Okay, and so I think that is definitely a prophetic shadow of what's about to happen in America. Okay, with the Civil War coming up in America, um, and so if you want to read about that in the scriptures, but we also read about Jeroboam sets up his own holiday on Chesvan 15, the 15th day of the 8th month. Okay, so that's very interesting too. um And, so just if you think, I mean, it's just I keep coming up with more stuff for October 21st. So that's why this is all really interesting. So a few days before, okay. So one of the reasons too that I'm looking at, I mean, the reason why I was looking early in October is that we're coming up to the okay, like, so I believe that the tribulation is like 10 years long, okay, because Abraham had 10 tests, and then Daniel and his friends had 10 days of testing. We read in Revelation where it talks about 10 days of testing too, I think. Um, so what's happening is we're coming up to, so what I believe is that the tribulation started on October 25th, 2010. Okay, so we're coming up to the 11th year anniversary of, what I think was the start of um, the tribulation. So I'm like, okay, well, if Jesus doesn't return before that, then I'm gonna have to rethink my thinking about the 10-year tribulation period. Okay. I mean, it's kind of interesting because we read about God shortening the time, and I mean, so far, I haven't seen much shortening. I wonder if the shortening of the time really just relates to Trump's return, that he just gets a half a week. Okay. But also, I guess it does kind of connect to if we are kind of seeing the Democrats imploding from the inside out. Um, that we have seen that God is making Biden's time really short. Um, uh, so, anyways, because October 23rd is Chesvan 17, which is the Great Flood, and so on the Hebrew calendar, that would have been the start of the tribulation period 11 years ago. Okay. Um, but then 2 days after that is October 25th, which is the Gregorian anniversary of what I consider the start of the tribulation. So there's that going on. Okay, so here's the 50. Okay. So remember that we saw the 50th um, floor of Trump Tower had the fires. Okay, so what does 50 connect to? Okay, and we saw it somewhere else, and now I can't remember that. Trying to remember all this stuff, but we saw 50 somewhere else too. But what do you remember the Great American Solar Eclipse happened on August 21st, 2017? Okay, do you remember that? Okay. I mean, that was obviously a really big sign from God. Okay, but there's always the thing like, what does it mean? What is God saying in this sign? Okay. Um so um what's very interesting is that this October 21st date is 50 months after this Great American Solar Eclipse. Okay. And we see that same 21 number there. You know, well, what's interesting too is we see that 8 there. So if we're in the 8 time frame and we're looking for 21, um, you know, um, so there's those connections. With 2017, so 7, 8, 9, 10. Don't see a connection there. Um, except to the connection of the 10 the 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 10 toes and the 10 I forget who it is, the 10 people that also receive power, with the beasts. Okay. Um there's that would connect to 10. Um what okay, so 1021 is also 90 weeks, 3 days after the deal of the century. Okay. So okay, the reason why 90 is significant is that Sarah was 90 when she had Isaac. Okay, so very interesting. Um, what I thought was interesting too was if you take the deal of the century and shorten it and make it DOC, that connects to Doc. So very interesting. Another uh, sign that God might be showing us in this movie. Um, um, 1021 is 84 weeks, 2 days after 311. Okay, 311, remember last year, 2020, that was when, um, you know, the coronavirus was considered, you know, when they declared it a pandemic, kind of, a, a big day in COVID history. Um, 1021 is 62 weeks, 1 day after the United Arab Emirates quote unquote peace deal. Okay, that 62 weeks is very significant because we see that in Daniel 9, where, when he's talking about the 70 weeks, he also talks about there's going to be a 7 week time frame, there's going to be a 62 week time frame. The 84 weeks connects to there's a prophet who was married for 7 years, and then she was a widow until she was 84. Okay. And so what I'm kind of wondering is that the 84 time frame relates to, like we're God's people are considered like kind of like a widow, where we're suffering kind of the judgment of God with this coronavirus. Okay. Um, so the evening sacrifice of the coronavirus. Um, um, yeah, and I don't remember if I said this too when I was talking about the 700,000. That would connect to like 100,000 per each of the churches. So, 7 churches. Um, okay, and then 1021 is 12 months, 24 days after Yom Kippur in 2020. Um, and so 1224 would be like Christmas Eve. So that's kind of interesting. Um, okay. And then, so I'm not really sure how this all works out, but, there's kind of some dates happen with 1020 and 1021. Okay. Because I think what some of the calculations is you might have to like actually be considering hours. And I don't get that detailed when I'm doing my calculations. But on 1020, we're seeing a full moon's happening at 10:57 in the morning, called the Hunter's Moon. So I thought that was kind of interesting. 1020 is the 40th day from 9/11. It's the 30th day from Sukkot, day 1, and it's the 10-month, 10-day from Hanukkah, day 1. Okay, so, I guess we start looking on the 20th through the 21st and see how that all kind of works out. And I've talked in my other videos too about how, we're definitely seeing these two groups. Like everyone's always kind of looking for the one world um, religion or the one world government or whatever. And, I think we've kind of missed um, that in scripture really gives us more of a picture of like two groups of people kind of um, um, rising up in the last days. Okay. Um, we kind of missed that. Oh, I did. I don't think I talked about. Let me see if I could. Oh, it's going to take me a long time to get back to this picture. But, well, I won't go back there. But you know how with 9/11, um, um, the two towers fall, and then there's one tower that comes out of it. Okay, so I kind of think um, that the 9/11 picture, like, first of all, the two towers falling, could be a picture of God's enemies that fall. And then the one tower that rises up could be a picture of like God's people, because God talks about, there's kind of the picture of, God has some in the prophets where he has them take the two sticks and he puts them together as one. And so, like, the Jew and the Gentile come together, to build the one. God builds his kingdom out of the Jew and Gentile. Okay, they become one new man. So that could be a picture of the one remaining tower after the two towers fall. But also, I don't know, like, the one World Trade Center could be a picture of, like, Biden's tower falls and then Trump's the tower is remaining for a short time. But I definitely think at some point Trump's tower falls. So maybe the one World Trade Center that got rebuilt is just a picture of Trump's tower. Um, I'm not totally sure. And then, anyways, so what I really think is that I think we're getting to really close where, if you don't follow God and Jesus is not your Messiah, then I think you're out, like, pretty close to being out of time, is what I think. I think that God is going to bring his judgment. And, I believe that his judgment is going to be his enemies, like, fighting against each other, that he, uses, he's going to use them to bring judgment, like, I mean, it could be hard for people to understand how God could use, like, Trump's followers, to accomplish his purposes. But I think that he's going to lead them to bring destruction. And, we read about Rachel or Rebecca, whoever it is that has twins, and she has twins in her womb, and so what we see is that the militant on the right aren't that much different than the militant on the left. They both really in their inner core have violence in their hearts, war in their hearts. Okay, so God's enemies have war in their hearts. Okay, so that's what I'm thinking. Okay, so I guess we will find out really soon, because I'm making this on October 17th, and October 21st is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, less than 5 days away. So all could be really fascinating to see what happens. I guess if it doesn't happen, I'm going to be really surprised, and then I'm going to have to recalculate everything and figure out what's going on. You know, so, but that's what I got for you today. So I really appreciate you tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a few things out of it. So hopefully it's encouraging. It'd be really interesting to find out if God really kind of did give us a clue about Jesus's return in the Back to the Future trilogy. So definitely very interesting. So thank you so much for tuning in. God bless. Take care.